Hi, I'm Dr. Sana Hashmi, and this week in my Eye on column for ThePrint, I examined China's foreign policy approach in 2023. 2023 was a mixed bag for China on the foreign policy front. China was able to reinforce ties with its friends such as Russia and Pakistan, but there were more challenges for China than stabilizing factors on the foreign policy front. So, throughout 2023, China dealt with precarious ties with the United States. There were persistent calls from the European Union for de risking. Then we also saw India's continued firm position on the border issue. And the Philippines' emergence as a credible contender in the South China Sea was also a huge problem for China. However, in the latter half of the year, we witnessed a significant change in China's approach. Some of the examples of that change include the softening of the wolf warrior diplomacy, and we also saw an olive branch to the US and the West as a whole from the Chinese side. But in the initial months of 2023, China's relations with the US suffered another setback. When there were efforts to stabilize ties, the Chinese spy balloon episode disrupted the potential for US China reconciliation. That development also prompted the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to cancel his scheduled visit to China in February. So then, in the initial months of the year, China turned its focus to the countries that were leaning towards anti-Western sentiments. And China also began to consolidate its position as the global South leader, as also a peace broker. And we also saw how China was able to broker a deal between Saudi Arabia, which is considered a US important partner in the Middle East, and with Iran, that is very known for its adversarial position stance towards the US. But then India fielding itself as a credible global South leader and global South voice. And then we also saw the continued Russia-Ukraine war this year, and then later the Israel-Hamas conflict presented China with a significant challenge and to its position of a peace broker. But later in the year, China shifted its position and its focus on stabilizing relations with the US and the West. But what was peculiar about China's approach was that its approach towards several Asian countries was a little less conciliatory and marked by territorial disputes, specifically if we consider it how China responded and reacted towards Western countries. So to advance China's West outreach, China welcomed a number of European leaders throughout the year, and it also hosted a somewhat lackluster EU-China summit. Then, additionally, Xi Jinping visited Russia, and which is widely, specifically after the Russia-Ukraine war, is often called as known as a junior partner to China. And Xi Jinping also visited Vietnam, and one of the biggest achievements, I would say, for China was, of course, when the Philippines is trying to be a strong contender, is trying to present its position in the South China Sea. Vietnam, that is another ASEAN country, was welcoming Xi Jinping. And another important issue was that Vietnam reaffirmed its acknowledgement of Taiwan as an inseparable part of the Chinese territory. However, amid this period, China also took a more assertive stance on territorial disputes. With the Philippines, tensions in the South China Sea simmered throughout the year. And with another major Asian giant, India, China continued to downplay the concerns of India, and it kept asking India to prioritize economic prospects, economic relationship over resolving the boundary dispute. Now, there was another important aspect this year that China continued to focus on its central position in some of the multilateral groupings. China, throughout the year, advocated for inclusive multilateralism. This is one of the objectives that China has been projecting and has been projecting itself as a leader of the global South. But what we also saw that its words did not really match its actions. And in reality, China's form and China's approach towards multilateralism was not truly inclusive. China opted for selective multilateralism. For example, it skipped important summits this year, such as the G20 summit in New Delhi and also a climate change summit, COP28 in Dubai. But then Xi Jinping attended the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, as well as the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco. So the main reason behind this was that China favored summits where competition and opposition were minimal, that also led it to prioritize summits that placed China in a central position, that led to aligning of its interest. And these are the summits where China had no pre-imposed condition. So in the last 2 years, China has also been introducing initiatives, and particularly when it comes to multilateralism, particularly when it comes to regional groupings and China's position in it. China introduced concepts such as global security initiative, global developmental initiative, as well as global civilizational initiative. So all these initiatives have been aimed to present an alternative to the Western-led rules-based order, and where China could take a leading role among global South countries. So it seems that the intention was not really to reform or contribute to the current world order, but rather to disrupt it and carve out China's own central position space in the global landscape. That is very distinct from the Western dominated paradigm. Then another important development when it comes to multilateralism was the hosting of the Belt and Road Forum. So this year, we saw that the number of leaders who attended the Belt and Road Forum was relatively smaller, but most of these leaders were those who held positive view of China and still perceive that China could be a credible stakeholder, could be a credible country providing cheap and quality infrastructure. But this year, we also saw Italy, a major G7 country, made an official exit from the Belt and Road Initiative. So, like China's foreign policy, Belt and Road Initiative was also a mixed bag for China. Belt and Road Initiative is not definitely dying, but its success and reception are still in somewhat dark. So, China's participation in multilateral groupings often highlights a priority of its own self-interest rather than solely promoting the proclaimed objectives of true multilateralism that have been presented by China. So going ahead, the question of how does China foreign policy look like next year? I think it is not going to be an easy path for China. The developments have led to the belief that this year China practiced an erratic foreign policy that lacked long-term strategic foresight. Then also, China let tensions with countries that were traditionally friendly towards China grow. Then at the same time, it showed willingness to normalize ties with the US and some of the major European economies such as France and Germany. But in my opinion, this displays an incoherent approach with respect to managing its foreign relations. Also because with the US, it seems unlikely that we will see lasting peace and cooperation. There is ongoing a trade and tech rivalry that has been going on between the US and China. And then China's objectives frequently collide with those upheld by the Western liberal order. And for China as well, it does not entirely align with the Western ideals. So China's lack of focus to improve ties with some of the major Asian countries and rising aggression are also prompting countries such as India and Philippines to reassess their China policy. And this is despite China's prominent position and status of a significant economic partner to majority of the countries in the world. So this idea that, the US, the normalization of relationship with the US is important, and then the lack of focus on the Asian countries is something that didn't really work for China. And this also led to a rising inclination among countries to resist aggression and growing concern about avoiding vulnerability to China's weaponizing of overdependence. So these concerns are actually propelling many in the global South to explore diversification of their economic partnership and actively seek alternative avenue for collaboration with other countries. And this is aimed to reduce reliance on any single market that is China. So we have also seen in the past couple of years that a lot of countries are focusing on relying over dependence on China and diversifying their economic relationship. And we've also seen that China has done not much to address the concerns of the countries in the region. So to conclude, I would say that China really went wrong with its westward charm and eastward friction, and it sought to stabilize ties with the West, the possibility of which seems bleak as of now. But what could have worked in China's favor is a more balanced approach towards Southeast Asian counterparts and even towards India. So moving towards, it seems that 2024 is also poised to pose significant challenges for China in terms of its foreign policy. Several persistent challenges, including the absence of signs indicating that India-China relationship are going to be normalized in the foreseeable future. Then, of course, the ongoing tech rivalry between US and China and the formidable South China Sea issue. These are the issues that will continue to hinder China's diplomatic efforts in 2024 and beyond. Thank you.